The whip cracked before the scream could even leave Kofi's throat. Leather tore into skin, ripping flesh from bone, the sound sharper than the cicadas screaming in the sugarcane fields. His body arched against the stake, bound wrists swollen, from rope, sweat, and blood mixing into the soil beneath his knees. Again, Overseer Collins hissed, his voice slick with venom. The lash fell, and the slaves forced to watch turned their eyes away. They had seen this too many times. They had smelled this before, the stink of torn flesh, the iron taste of blood in the air. But Kofi refused to cry out, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the horizon where the sun was burning itself into a red wound. He would not give Collins the sound of his pain. He would not give the master the satisfaction of hearing him break. The silence angered them more than screams ever. Could Collins leaned close, spittle flecking his words. One day, boy, we'll open you up and sell you piece by piece, and you'll beg for death. Kofi's lips trembled, not from fear, but from the strength it took to whisper back. Then I'll die whole, and not one of you will own my soul. The other slaves heard it. For a flicker of a moment, in the darkness of their chains, a spark lit, a spark the overseers could not stamp out. Asterisk, the sun rose like a burning brand across the fields. Its light did not promise warmth or freedom. It promised only another day. Of chains, Kofi's hands, blistered and scarred, gripped the machete. The sugarcane stood tall, endless rows swaying like soldiers waiting to be cut down. Each swing of the blade tore through stalks, each motion dragging pain through his spine. Sweat stung his lashes, dripping into his eyes, but he did not stop. Stopping meant the whip stopped the overseer. Collins rode his horse along the rows, the leather whip coiled in his fist. His shadow fell across the men and women, bent double in the fields, and every back seemed to bow lower under its weight. Faster, Collins barked. Sun's climbing, and you're crawling like dogs. The crack of the whip followed his words. A boy no more than 12 screamed as leather split his skin. The others flinched, but none dared to look. Kofi wanted to turn, to shield the child, but the whip had no mercy for pity. He forced his blade through the stalks. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and sweet sugar rotting under the sun. Later, when dusk fell and the overseers herded them back, Kofi sat in the dirt of the slave quarters. The walls were thin, the roof patched with straw, but it was the only place they could breathe without someone standing over them. He lay back, chest rising and falling like a man who had survived battle. Oba, his friend, sat beside him, silent. His eyes carried a weight heavier than chains. They took 3 more today, Oba muttered finally. His voice was a whisper, meant for no ears but Kofi's, said they were sold. But you know, Kofi nodded. He knew. The missing did not return. They vanished into the dark places of the plantation, and whispers said their bodies were not buried whole. Oba's gaze flickered to the boy beaten in the field earlier. The child's mother held him close, rocking him silently, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. No words could mend that wound. Kofi leaned his head back against the wall, eyes closed. In the darkness, he heard a song, soft, trembling, carried on Amos's voice from the corner of the quarters. It was a prayer, not for freedom, not for mercy, but for strength to survive one more day. Kofi clutched the memory of his mother's voice, singing in another tongue, long ago under African skies. He would not let them take that memory. They could scar his body, but they would not erase the sound of her song. As sleep pressed down, he whispered to himself, almost inaudible, I will not vanish. I will not be silent. Asterisk. Asterisk, the morning bell clanged before the sky had fully lightened. The slaves stirred, groaning, bones stiff from sleeping on dirt floors. Smoke from the overseer's torches still lingered in the air. Kofi pushed himself up, his back aching where the whip had kissed him days before. The scars tugged when he moved. But pain was a language he had long learned to speak without complaint. They filed into the fields under Collins' command. He sat atop his horse, tall and smug, the whip in one hand, a rifle slung across his back. His gaze moved across the slaves like a hawk, searching for weakness. He fed on fear. It curled his lips into a smile. Sing, Collins barked. His voice carried across the cane fields. Silence. The slaves bent to work, but no one sang. The whip cracked against the earth. I said sing. A woman's trembling voice began first, a melody meant for survival, not joy. The others followed, their voices blending into a forced chorus. The sound filled the air, hollow, aching, stripped of all spirit. Collins grinned. He loved their humiliation. He wanted them to sing while their backs broke and their souls bent. Kofi sang too, his deep voice blending with the others, but inside he seethed. Each note was a chain, each lyric a reminder of the cruelty that demanded joy where none could live. That night, in the quarters, Oba sat beside Kofi again. His eyes were restless, darting toward the door. "They took Mosey," he whispered. "Him out before dawn, told his wife he'd been sold south." "You believe that?" Kofi didn't answer. He didn't need to. The lie was too thin. Everyone knew Mosey would not be seen again. "They say it's the doctor," Oba continued, his voice dropping lower. "Dr. Aldridge, he cuts them open, takes what he wants, organs, blood, sells it to rich men in town, like we're cattle." Kofi's stomach churned. He had heard rumors, whispers, that felt too monstrous to be true. But every missing man, every missing woman, the silence around their absence confirmed it. A sound broke the moment heavy boots outside. Colin's voice barked orders. Closer now. The door swung open, torchlight spilling inside. The overseer's shadow loomed long and dark. "You," Collins growled, pointing the whip's handle at Kofi, "stand." Kofi rose slowly, every muscle tensed. Colin's eyes locked on him, cold and hungry, the kind of look a butcher gives before cutting into flesh. "You work strong," Collins said, his tone mocking. "Strong men fetch a higher price. Careful, boy. Master's got eyes on you." The overseer smirked, then slammed the door shut, leaving the slaves in suffocating silence. Oba leaned close, his whisper trembling like dry leaves in the wind. "They're marking you, Kofi. You'll be next." Asterisk night on the plantation was never truly quiet. The wind carried the rustle of cane stalks, the creak of chains shifting on worn ankles, the muffled sobs of mothers holding children who had cried themselves empty. Kofi sat near the wall of the quarters, knees drawn to his chest. His back throbbed from the day's labor, but pain was no longer enough to keep him awake. It was the voices that did the whispers that spread like smoke in the dark. "They took for last week," an old man muttered, his voice brittle as dry wood. "Not sold, taken, they say. The doctor cuts them," a woman's trembling voice added, "cuts them open like hogs, takes hearts, livers, leaves the rest in the dirt." Gasps shuddered through the cramped room. Someone crossed themselves, another rocked back and forth, humming an old hymn to block out the words. Kofi's jaw clenched. His mind returned to the memory of Abba's warning. "They're marking you." He wanted to dismiss it, but the truth gnawed at him. He had seen the way Colin's eyes lingered too long, the way the master whispered to the doctor during supper. He thought of Mosey, of the others who had gone south. Faces that had vanished but still lingered in every shadow. They haunted the fields, the quarters, the silence. Later, when most had fallen into restless sleep, Kofi heard movement. A gentle hand touched his shoulder. It was Amma. Her eyes glistened in the faint moonlight seeping through the cracks in the wall. "Don't listen too deep," she whispered. "Fear eats faster than hunger." But Kofi saw the truth in her eyes. She had heard the same whispers, and she believed them. "Tell me," Kofi urged. Amma hesitated, her hands trembling. "I've been in the infirmary, cleaning, carrying water. I saw blood, buckets of it. I saw tools, knives, saws. They don't mend slaves there. They tear them apart." Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle the sound. Tears traced down her cheeks, glistening like tiny rivers. Kofi's chest tightened. The walls around him seemed to close in. Slavery had already stolen their freedom, their families, their futures, but this was worse. They were not even seen as human, just parts, organs, commodities to be traded and consumed. Amma reached for his hand. Her touch was soft, fragile, but grounding. "You're strong, Kofi, too strong. That's why they watch you." Kofi swallowed. Hard. His heart pounded against his ribs like a drum of war. For the first time in years, he felt not just fear, but rage. A fire lit in his chest. He whispered back, low and fierce, "They can take my body, but they will never take my spirit. Not while I breathe, not while I breathe." The moon was high when Collins came pounding on the quarters door. "Kofi!" he barked, voice slicing the silence. "On your feet! You've got work." The other slaves stirred, fear tightening their throats. Kofi rose slowly, every muscle tensed. Emma caught his arm as he passed. Her grip was desperate, trembling. "Don't go," she whispered. But he had no choice. Chains clinked as Collins dragged him into the night. They crossed the yard, past the barns and the cane fields, toward the back sheds no slave dared approach. The air there was thick, heavy, and foul. A copper stench clung to it, thick enough. To taste, Collins shoved Kofi toward the doors. Inside, lanterns burned low. Wooden crates lined the walls. Sawdust on the floor was soaked dark, sticky beneath Kofi's bare feet. He dared not look too closely at the stains. "Lift," Collins ordered, kicking at a crate. Kofi bent, gritting his teeth against the weight. The wood creaked as he hoisted it into his arms. Something shifted inside with a wet thud. The smell was unmistakable now. Iron, rot, death. Another slave, gaunt and shaking, carried a crate beside him. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting glance the truth passed between them. These were not boxes of sugar or tools. These were bodies, or parts of bodies. Kofi's stomach knotted. He forced himself not to gag, not to drop the weight, though bile burned his throat. Collins watched him like a vulture, whip dangling ready strong. "Ain't you?" the overseer sneered. "Doctor. Like that? Heart like yours, worth a fortune." The word struck harder than the whip. Kofi's body felt suddenly smaller, fragile, as if Collins could already see through his skin, down to the organs inside. They loaded the crates onto a wagon. Kofi's arms trembled from the weight, but his rage burned hotter than exhaustion. Rage at the doctor, at the master, at Collins, at the endless silence forced upon them. When the last crate was loaded, Collins stepped close, so near Kofi could smell the sour stench of whiskey on his breath. "You'll end up in one of those boxes. Moi, mark me for a heartbeat." Imagined driving his fist into Collins' throat. Imagined wrapping the chains still on his wrists around the overseer's neck until silence claimed him. The urge was raw, feral, but he swallowed it down. One wrong move, and Oba, the others, they would pay the price. So he lowered his head. Lips pressed tight, and carried the rage like fire buried deep in his chest. Back in the quarters, hours later, he sank against the wall. His body shook with exhaustion, his hands still stained with the faint trace of blood from the crates. Amma was waiting. She knelt beside him, pressing a rag to his palms, washing the filth away. "What did you see?" she whispered. Kofi stared at her, jaw tight, eyes burning. "Death," he answered finally. "I carried death with my own hands." The room was silent, save for the sound of his trembling breath. Then, softly, almost like a vow, he added, "But I will not go into one of those boxes quietly." The night after the crates, Kofi did not sleep. He sat upright against the wall, the rag Amma had used still damp in his hands, the smell of iron lingering in his nostrils. Every time his eyelids grew heavy, he felt the weight of the box again, shifting. Heavy wet, by dawn his body ached. But worse than the ache was the knowledge. The whispers were no longer whispers. He had touched them, smelled them, carried them. Ama sat across from him in the weak morning light. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a fierceness in her face he had never seen before. She leaned close, voice low, urgent. "You need to hear it from me," she said. Kofi frowned. "What?" "I worked there," she whispered. "The infirmary. The doctor made me clean. I saw things, Kofi." Her hands trembled as she spoke, fingers twisting the hem of her dress. "They bring us in alive, tie us down." She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "He cuts them open while they still breathe. Sometimes he gives them whiskey, sometimes nothing. I've seen chests opened. I've seen hearts lifted like fruit from a tree. Liver Eyes, 2 men who pay more than a slave, is worth whole, and when he is done, what's left, they throw it in the ground, shallow and unmarked." The silence after her words was suffocating. Kofi's stomach churned. Bile burned his throat. His hands trembled with fury. Amma's eyes brimmed with tears, but she pressed on. "They keep lists. Strong men, healthy women, young ones. You're on it, Kofi. I saw your name." The room spun. His chest tightened like iron bands around his ribs. He wanted to deny it, to call her wrong, but he had already felt Colin's gaze, heard his words. He knew. Oba crawled closer, face drawn. Wide with fear, we're livestock to them. Not even livestock, they eat piece by piece. Kofi's jaw clenched. No, he said, his voice low, shaking with rage. We are not cattle. We are not pieces. Touched his scarred hands gently, her voice trembling but steady. If you mean that, then fight with your spirit. Hold on to yourself, even if they cut you open. That's all they cannot steal. That night, Kofi lay awake while the others drifted into exhausted slumber. His mind swirled with faces Mosey Abo's missing brother, the women taken before, Don Ama's haunted eyes. The image of the crates would not leave him. The sound of shifting weight, the smell of death, and then came the vow, forged in silence, carved deeper than any lash of the whip. If they come for me, I will not go as cattle. I will not go silent. I will carry the names of every soul they stole, and I will make them remember us. His body trembled, but inside, the fire was spreading. Asterisk, the morning sun was merciless. It painted the fields gold, but there was no beauty here, only chains glinting in the light, sweat burning through wounds. Voices hoarse from forced songs. Kofi's body moved like a machine, machete rising and falling, stalks toppling into piles. From rage, each swing carried the weight of Ama's words. The images she had planted in his mind, the doctor's knives, the shallow graves. Colin saw it. The overseer always saw it. He rode past, narrowing his eyes at Kofi. Something burning in... You boy, he drawled. Careful. Fire gets put out quick round here. That evening, as the slaves were herded back, Kofi made a mistake. A child stumbled near him, too weak to walk. The boy's father was gone, taken days earlier. The overseer raised his whip, ready to strike the child down. Before he could think, Kofi stepped forward. His arm came up, shielding the boy. The whip cracked against his back, ripping open flesh. Again and again, Colin's face twisted with fury. They tied Kofi to the post in front of the quarters. Every slave was forced to watch. The whip fell until his back was a map of fire and blood. His knees buckled, but he refused to scream. The only sound was his ragged breath and the whip's cruel rhythm. When at last they left him crumpled in the dirt, night had fallen. The slaves whispered prayers, tears shining in the dark, but none dared move. Touched him before dawn would share his punishment. Hours later, when the overseer slept, Ama crept forward. Oba crouched beside her, whispering, he should be dead. But Kofi opened his eyes. Through blood and dust, he looked at them. His voice was broken, rasping, yet steady. They can tear me apart, they can break this body, but I am not theirs. Ama wept silently as she cleaned his wounds. Her touch was gentle, a cruel contrast to the day's savagery. Oba leaned close, whispering fiercely, why do you fight? Why not just endure? Kofi forced his eyes open wider, every word dragging from his chest like iron. Because if I let them break me, then I am already dead. The next days were torment. His back burned with every step, every breath. Yet he returned to the fields, machete in hand. The overseers mocked him, waiting for him to collapse, but he did not dot. Each stroke of the blade was agony, but each was also defiance. His body bent, but his spirit rose taller. The others saw it in the way he endured, in the way his eyes burned when the master passed, in the way he refused to let silence claim him. For the first time, whispers spread not of fear, but of Kofi's strength. And Collins noticed, the overseer's smile turned darker, more dangerous. That night, as Am attended to him again, she whispered, they will not forgive this. They will make you an example. Kofi's voice was hoarse, broken, but his words were iron then. Let them. They will never break me. They can own my body, but not my soul, but not my soul. The air was heavy that night, the kind of stillness that pressed against the skin like a warning. The quarters were hushed, bodies curled together for warmth, but no one truly slept. Something was coming. Boots thundered in the dirt outside. The door flung open, torchlight spilling in. Up, Collins barked. Bring her. Hurt to her feet, she struggled, kicking, crying out. No, please. Kofi surged forward, his body a storm of fury. Take me, he shouted, voice cracking. Take me instead. Collins struck him across the face with the butt of his rifle. He roared again, voice breaking with desperation. Amma's eyes locked on him as they pulled her away. In them was terror, but also something else, love unspoken, shining in the last glance she gave him. Silence followed. Only Kofi's ragged sobs broke it. He staggered outside later, ignoring Oba's pleas to stay down. His vision swam, but rage drove him forward. Kofi fell to his knees in the dirt, powerless. He beat the ground with his fists until they bled. A broken cry ripping from his throat. Dr. Aldridge giving commands, then silence. Cold, absolute silence. Amma was gone. Back in the quarters, the slaves sat in stunned grief. No one spoke, no one could. The air was heavy with her absence. Oba placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder. Brother, he whispered, you cannot fight this. Kofi lifted his head. His face was streaked with blood and dust, his eyes hollow but burning with a fire that made Oba recoil. I will not endure this, Kofi rasped. Hands, I will stop them with my voice. I will not let her name vanish. Oba shook his head in fear, but Kofi's vow carried a weight that silenced every doubt that night. While the others lay silent, Kofi whispered into the darkness, over and over, like a prayer, like a song, Amma. The walls could not contain it. The night could not swallow it. Her name lived on his lips, and it would never die. Asterisk, asterisk, the summons came before dawn. The guards stormed the quarters, rifles raised, chains clattering in their hands. Kofi, Collins sneered, his voice oily with triumph. Your turn. The slave stirred, terror filling the room. His body shook, but inside he was steel. They can take me, he said quietly, but they will not silence me. He lifted his head to the sky. Stars fading into the pale bruising of dawn, and thought of Amma, of his mother's lullaby, of the men and women who had vanished without a word. Inside the doctor's shed, the stench was suffocating. Iron, rot, smoke. The table waited, leather straps hanging like snakes. Dr. Aldridge stood ready, apron stained, eyes cold with greed. Mr. Harrow, the master, watched from the shadows. Heart this one, he said. Worth every penny. Kofi was forced onto the table. Leather tightened around his wrists, his ankles. The straps bit into his raw skin. Meat. But Kofi's eyes burned with something the straps could not hold. He opened his mouth, and he spoke. At first it was a whisper, a name, Oba. Then another, Mosey, then louder, Amma. The doctor frowned. Collins raised the whip, shut him up. But Kofi shouted louder, voice raw, torn, yet unbreakable. He called every name he remembered, every man, woman, child who had vanished, each one a weapon, each one a defiance. The other slaves outside heard it. The names rose through the walls, carried across the yard. They stopped their work, frozen, listening. The voices of the dead filled the morning air through Kofi's broken throat. Collins struck him, but Kofi did not stop. Blood poured from his split lip. His chest heaved with agony. But still, he shouted. The doctor raised the scalpel, furious. Hold him down. But Kofi's voice rose higher, louder, until it was not just names, but a cry that shook the air. You will not erase us. The scalpel plunged. Pain ripped through him, white-hot, blinding. His body convulsed, but his lips kept moving, even as blood filled his mouth. The names tumbled out, broken, gasping, defiant. Outside, the slaves began to whisper the names with him, first soft, then louder, until dozens of voices carried the litany, Ama, Mosey Oba, names like fire. But the voices did not stop, and then, at last, Kofi's breath gave out. His head fell back, eyes open but empty. But the slaves did not forget. That night, in the quarters, Oba whispered his name. Then another whispered it back. Could bind their bodies. Knives could steal their flesh. But Kofi had proven a truth the master could never kill. Their voices would never be silenced.